In this video, I'm gonna assume that you have watched all my videos on the different system design patterns, and now you are ready to start to build your own system. Now, in this video, we're going to be discussing choosing the right system design or choosing the right architecture. Now, a pragmatic approach that I would always advise every one of my followers to follow is really looking at it from a very simple standpoint. Always start simple. Starting simple because you don't want to complicate things from the scratch, right? So it is often best to begin with monolith architectures for your projects, right? Many successful systems today were built as monolithic architectures from scratch. Think about your Amazons, think about your Netflix. They started with monoliths and they evolved later to become what they are today. So get something working, right? Get your MVP, get something working from scratch, and then you can start adding multiple architectural complexities as you go. Number two, you can start to evolve during that process to microservices. Now, you don't evolve the entire system. You evolve specific components that could potentially become bottlenecks, right? Or if your team grows large and they gradually start to extract services from the monolith, right? You use microservices for modules that require independent scaling, right? Or deployment, not for everything. Those modules that they require independent scaling and they require independent deployment, not for everything. So you don't start to spend so much money on your hardware or your server costs. Number three, we can now start to add different events for decoupling of those different services. So as your system starts to grow, event-driven approaches help to integrate the different services without typed coupling. So it will start to introduce what we call asynchronous messaging for asynchronous tasks. Things like improving resilience, it improves your throughput under serious load, right? It sort of creates that event-driven architecture where every one of the services are subscribed to a message broker, and you would have a producer and you'd have a consumer. For more information on event-driven architecture, watch my video on event-driven architectures. Finally, in this four-step approach, leverage cloud services. Now, don't build everything from scratch. Use managed databases, authentication services, caching, and possibly serverless components to accelerate your development. And you can sort of build things faster. You can go to market faster. Now, another important element that I don't want to stop mentioning is your team and your skill fit. It is important that you choose a pattern that your team can actually manage. So, microservices and their complex distributed systems demand solid DevOps practices, right? Not just anybody can manage these. And so it is important that your team is well equipped to manage these kinds of complexities. So if your team is small or they lack this kind of complex experience, a simpler architecture will deliver results faster and reliable for your system. So architecture should enable your team and not burden your team. So you need to make sure that you are looking at this process the right way. Now, a recap, we said at the beginning of your process or at the beginning of your system design or um, choosing the right architecture, use a pragmatic framework. Start with a monolith, right? And then you can move on to a modular monolith whereby you have different modules, you have different services, right? That are well defined, right? And then you can start to introduce events whereby you add queues for asynchronous flows. And then finally, you use managed services, microservices, independent services that scale so you are not building everything yourself. It is super important that you use a pragmatic approach and you don't waste your money or your company funds or your startup funds in order to be able to build. This is an important fact, and this is why people lose money and why investors complain about startups wasting money. It is very important to be pragmatic and start small. Everyone aims to have 1 million users, but before you get to 1 million users, you need to build for the scale that you are at. If you haven't watched any of my videos on monolithic, microservices, event-driven architecture, please go back and watch them. They would explain in each and every step how these different services or different architectural patterns give you the strengths that they have and the weaknesses that follow. It's important to understand these things when making decisions.